As you're joining this webinar, I'm just assuming a lot of you are familiar with feeling very frustrated when you're deploying Salesforce Flows with change sets. There's no visibility, so you lose track of versions, overwrite work, and probably see deployments fail too. Well, it doesn't have to be that way. In this webinar, Cristine Moret-Otero, Senior Salesforce Developer at MathWorks, is going to show you how she deploys flows successfully first time. If you've got any questions for Cristine as we go through, please do drop those in the Q&A box, and we'll hopefully have some time at the end to go through those with Cristine. Okay, over to you, Cristine.
Thank you, Nicola. So as Nicola mentioned, I'm Cristine Moret-Otero. I'm a senior Salesforce developer here with the MathWorks team. I've been on the Salesforce platform, working in the Salesforce platform now for about 8 years. And on a personal note, I am a gardener. I currently am a plant mom to about 8 plants. And here is the QR code on the left if you wanted to connect on LinkedIn. And just shoot me a message. Feel free to shoot me a message. All right, let's get started. So what we'll be covering today, we've already gone through the quick intro, but we'll be going through a deployment scenario. We'll also be going through comparing change sets and Gearset Flow Navigator. And then we'll go through a demo session of the Flow Navigator. And then we'll save questions towards the end. All right, let's get started. So here we have our deployment scenario. The business wants to streamline, right, the process of creating and cloning cases, case record types based on the specific custom field called support tier on account record. So the focus is to provide an efficient experience, right, by limiting the screen to key fields, and also limiting record type options based off of that dependent field right on account, which is support tier. Some of the deployment components are going to be, of course, flow. We'll have custom field and standard fields, some page layouts, record types, and quick actions. So let's go ahead and dive in. So here in the change sets, we all experienced this screen in the past or in the current present. Now, what I've highlighted here for change sets, you'll notice is that I've highlighted the flow here in red, the box. I've also highlighted a potential missing component, which is a custom field on account. That gold field API name correlates to the support tier field that we talked about on the previous screen. So some of the key challenges with change sets is that we don't really have visibility into the changes of the components that we're moving, right? It's a pretty static interface, like as you can see here on the screenshot, with just the names, and we don't really get much visibility into what exactly is being changed on that component, particularly with flows. Also, when we're talking about bigger packages, there's a lot of rework that needs to happen with change sets when we miss dependent components, such as the example here, right? We're missing a custom field in our potential package that we're putting together with change sets. And you only really realize that until you get to the next environment in your change set flow, and it tells you it can't deploy due to a missing component. Also, there's failed validations, right, that happen later in the process as well. It's very much, you put together your change set in your dev environment and you just ship it off to the next environment, right? And then only then when you receive that inbound change set, do you start to see, oh, there's a missing component or it failed validation against your next environment, right? It's very late in the process, that notification of validation error. So what can we do to improve this, right? So let's take a look at Gearset Flow Navigator and how that looks like. So in the Gearset Flow Navigator scenario, we have this beautiful screen. And I want to call out that this is the Gearset Flow Navigator comparison feature, right? This looks a lot like Flow Builder, but it is not. So we can see very called out very nicely here on the left side navigation, all the components that are changed within our flow. We also have this beautiful view on the right of exactly like you would get with the flow builder tree within Salesforce, with the addition of the changes being highlighted, right? So that's also very useful. So some key things that to call out with Gearset Flow Navigator, as you can see, the Salesforce like display that highlights the changes, but also within Gearset, you get problem analyzer, which highlights potential missed components with your deployment packages. And once we get into the demo, I'll call it out and show you guys what that looks like. Also, there's efficient package validation. So you're able to validate your package before you even attempt to deploy it onto your next environment, which is very useful because you can quickly check to see if it'll pass the validation and then proceed to either schedule it or deploy it right then and there on demand. If it fails validation, then no big deal. You can just go back and edit your package. And we'll see what that looks like in a second with the demo. Right, let's dive into the demo. So what we're going to do here is switch over screens. So I'm just going to briefly walk us through what the change, right, is what, viewed within Salesforce. So here we have the support tier on the account record page that we were talking about. Right now it's set to bronze. So if I were to create a new case here, it would take me directly to creating the case because bronze tier only really has access to one case record type, right? But what happens if I change it, right, to a higher tier, silver, for sake of example? So let's go ahead and save that and let's launch the same flow. So here I'm not actually offered the option to select a record type because I have access to different record types for this support tier. So that's the functionality, right, that we described during that deployment scenario. All right, so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna dive into what that looks like with Gearset deployments. So here I've transitioned over to Gearset. And we're going to get started with a comparison for a deployment. So we're going to select our dev environment because that's where the changes are. We're going to click Salesforce Organization, and we're going to click Integration Environment to move our changes over to the integration environment. So you'll notice here on the bottom right corner, there is an option to select different comparison filters. For purposes of this demo, I've actually pre-built a filter, right, to make the comparison a little bit quicker here. So it's going to go ahead and grab, compare, right, between my source environment, which is dev, and my target environment, which is integration, right here. And you'll notice that at the very top, we have the flow. So let's actually open up Flow Builder and take a look at all the features. So let me just zoom out here a little bit so we can get a better view. There we go. So this would be Flow Builder. On the left-hand side here, we have six changes that are being highlighted, right? And we'll take a look, click through and see what those are in a second. But we can also take a look at all the components as you would, right, in Flow Builder. So you get a really holistic view of everything, and it's highlighted. Like my change components are in yellow, everything that's the same is in gray. All right, so let's go ahead and click on a change and see what that looks like. So right here, I can easily see that I'm default setting, right, the record type ID to bronze. And I'm also default setting the priority field here to low. And that's the new change, right? Feedback came in potentially from the business users, and they were like, okay, let's set the priority by default, depending on the support tier. So if we were to click on this other change, which is set record type ID silver, we can see that for silver record type, we're defaulting the priority to medium. And same thing for the gold tier, right? So we're defaulting the priority to high. Some other changes that are in this flow as well are screen changes, such as adding that header, right, with the account name that we saw, and the tier. So these are the changes that were implemented for the screens. So it is very much, you get the complete holistic visibility for the changes that we're implementing in the flow, which is great. We even have this little mini map here for larger flows, like to help with navigation, which is very, very helpful. All right, so let's go ahead and exit the screen. Let's exit the full screen. So just a couple things to note, right? We do have other differences here highlighted in this compare and deploy, right? But we're going to grab the flow specifically to deploy to our next environment, which is integration. Okay. Last thing before we move to the next screen that I wanted to call out, it is that it's very easy to just focus on key components that you want to compare and deploy. Just simply deselect everything and you can check off what you want to focus on. So this is very, very helpful to kind of just get a easier, efficient view of what you want to focus on to compare and deploy. All right, let's head off to the next section. So right now, Problem Analyzer was checking to see, right, if there was any potential dependent components missing or any other potential issues, right, with permissions that would impact this deployment. That's what would be listed here if it found any issues, such as, for sake of example, with our previous slide, the missing custom field, right, with that change that we saw. We've already deployed that field and other components already into integration. We're just moving this specific flow change into integration. So Problem Analyzer didn't flag anything. All right, let's go to pre-deployment summary. So right here, we're just giving a description, right, a friendly name, moving flow changes demo, and also just moving the screen changes. Another important key thing to call out here is that you can actually link your Jira tickets or other ticket tracking systems, right, to this deployment that you would do. And it writes back all the information to the ticket, which is extremely useful, huge time saver. All right. So we're just about ready to deploy our changes from our dev environment into integration. But one last thing I wanted to call out here is that you can actually schedule the deployment. You have the option to schedule it. And you can go ahead and set a date, a specific time, even have it email, right, results to certain individuals. And you can even add integrations to Slack, Microsoft, which is all very, very useful to let key stakeholders know that the deployment was completed. All right, so for sake of this demo, of course, we're just going to click deploy now on demand. So let's go ahead and do that. Actually, let's cancel that because I want to validate my deployment first. So let's go ahead and just validate my deployment. And this is the piece, right, where we were talking about being able to validate your deployments prior to actually attempting the deployment, right? Just to get that feedback. And as you can see here, it was just a flow change. It quickly succeeded. So we're going to go ahead and now finally click that final deploy button. All right. So it'll take a couple seconds but let's just see what we get, right? The information. So as you can see, it was successful as expected. And we get all of the information here for what was the source, where did it go. Also, we get lots of information here for the components. So if it was a very large deployment, you would get a list, right, of everything that was moved. And you get some information here for how long did it take, and also information for the name. And if you connected a ticket, you would see the ticket tracking system information as well here on the bottom. All right. Next, what we'll do, we'll actually switch screens and we'll go to deployment history so we can see, right, we just deployed something. So let's take a look at the deployment history. Here on deployment history, you'll notice that we have 2 deployments that happened. So we had a deployment happen from we had a deployment happen to stage. We moved items into stage. And it actually was pre-scheduled, so it completed right around 1:10-ish. And let's take a look at what exactly got moved into stage. So here we can see it was successful. And now let's actually take a look at, so we can see here, right, that we moved a bunch of components. This was like the base layer, custom object, the fields, and all the page layouts that we talked about in our deployment scenario. So the base components were moved in this deployment. Now what we're going to do is actually the flow changes that we just moved into integration. We're going to deploy them to stage. And we can quickly do that by navigating back to deployment history. This is the deployment that we just did together on this webinar. We're going to we can click clone package, or we can use this nifty drop down and we can deploy to target. So clone package and deploy to target are 2 different features. Deploy to target is just going to ask you, right, where do you want to send it to? It's going to default you, right? And you can just select right here and you can just select integration. But let's say that you wanted to add other changes, right? We saw that there were other changes, in fact, between dev and integration. So let's go back to deployment history. Let's clone this package. We can select our source, which is going to be dev, and integration. And we can select our target, which is going to be stage. And let's run a comparison. What this clone package feature is going to do, and it's same with deploy to target, it's going to take any pre-selected components that we deployed in that package, and it's just going to automatically select them to be deployed into the next environment. And we'll see what that looks like in a second once it's done comparing. It'll be pre-selected changes. It'll even pull in the friendly name and also the details that we provided when we deployed the original, right, from dev into integration. So it'll copy over everything exactly the same as we defined it in the original deployment. So if we were to click selecting items here at the top left, you'll see we only have 1 item really, it's the flow. But if we had like 5 different items, everything would be pre-selected. There's no need to rebuild the package again. It's all there for you. If you had some changes, right, between integration and stage that you wanted to pull in, doesn't seem like there. Okay, so there are others. So we can go ahead and edit the package, right? Pull in other changes. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, so we've added other changes. And that's the key difference between cloning the package and deploying to target. You can't really edit the package when you're deploying to target. When you clone the package, though, you can add additional changes. So let's go ahead and move to the next screen. So problem analyzer hasn't flagged anything, right? We have all the important fields and permissions, dependent components that we need for this deployment. So we'll move on to the next screen. And we'll go ahead and move our changes. Let's actually edit the deployment notes, right? Everything's exactly the same as was before, but we've added some stuff, right? So let's go ahead and add object changes. And let's go ahead and deploy it. So now it's taking a couple of seconds, of course, to deploy the items into our stage environment. And see here, I chose to deploy it without validating it beforehand, right? But that's no issue here because we can just go back to the results. And for sake of this demo, I'll just remove that account. But we can see that we get notified, right, of any failures right then and there, which is great feedback to get, right? Because we can resolve any issues much more efficiently. Right, so let's go pre-deployment page. Let's validate before we deploy. See if we get any other errors. Right, so far it's passing validation, and now we can go ahead and deploy it into stage. Okay, so that pretty much covers the entire scenario. I'll give it a second here just so we can see the successful page. Now we have successfully moved our items from integration into stage, and we can see the new record, right, for the deployment history. We even get the history on that failed deployment as well. Now, let's say that we had issues with the deployment, right? This deployment we just did into stage wasn't great. The flow is giving some errors. We do have a rollback feature right here that we can just go ahead and have the flow revert to its previous version. Also, any other components that were included, such as that object, also, if we were to roll back, would go back to the original state it was prior to deployment. Okay, let's go ahead and switch back to the presentation. That concludes the demo portion. All right. We'll switch here to the screen. Just to recap, right, we saw the Gearset Flow Navigator feature, and which is screenshotted here, and it is a Salesforce-like display, right, that highlights all of our changes, just like Flow Builder, right? The tree navigation that we have here on the right. We can click into each individual component, and we have that visibility for the changes that were made. We also saw problem analyzer, just calculating to see, right, if there were any missed dependent components. And we also saw how very, very efficient validating your packages is, right? Critically important prior to deployment. Okay, all right. Here are some reference materials that I've included for specifically Flow Navigator, but also draft deployments, which was that initial package that we saw, right, being deployed into stage by at 110, right? Also, we have some materials around configuring comparisons, which is the compare and deploy that we used to move the flow, and also managing org connections. So another key call out that I just wanted to make between comparing Gearset and ChangeSets is that with Gearset, you just connect all your orgs. With ChangeSet, you have to kind of like organize, right, the inbound, outbound environments. With Gearset, it is much more simpler. to manage all of those connections. All right, now we're diving into Q&A.
That was brilliant, Christine. Thank you so much for walking us through that real world example. Good to see with the change sets and then how you do it now with Gearset Flow Navigator. And you're right, yeah, let's we've got some time here for Q&A. So if anyone's got any questions, just pop them in the Q&A box and we'll see how many we can get through. I think we've got one on a recording. Yes, and this recording will be shared with you all, so you can watch back anything. You can rewatch it, or if there's any bits that you've missed. Okay, for you, Christine, first question. Any tips on convincing colleagues who've always used change sets to switch?
So there are a couple key factors for convincing fellow colleagues on your same level, but also more importantly, managers, right? Senior stakeholders. More important, the best advice I can give is to highlight the value, not only increase in productivity, right? Because it is much more efficient to use Gearset rather than change sets with your deployments, but also the visibility as well that you get into what the changes were, who moved the changes, and that granularity that you get to really review the changes prior to deploying them, because there's no visibility with change sets. It is quite challenging, right, to move those changes if you don't know exactly what's going on, because the developer that made those changes will know exactly what they're moving, but let's say that a fellow team member that's not necessarily familiar is moving it, then they wouldn't necessarily know, right? So that granular visibility for anyone building that package is extremely important.
Brilliant. What happens if I deploy a flow and find it's throwing errors? How do I roll back?
So as I highlighted in the demo, you can use that rollback feature. It is very, very useful. It will revert any and all changes deployed as part of that package. So in our case, the flow and the object, it will revert it back to its default state just prior to deployment. And it's as simple as a couple of clicks and you're done.
Great. Okay, this is, can you give light highlight on Salesforce implementation methodology?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch the question.
I think they're looking for, I wonder if they could re-ask that question and we can jump to another one. Did you need training for Gearset/Flow Navigator?
So Gearset has a lot of useful documentation in their self-service website. Also, there's DevOps Launchpad as well. So there's a lot of resources out there that Gearset provides to help new Gearset users really ramp up quickly and get started comparing and deploying.